Hello, can you hear me? Good, good. Well, my name's Paul Hardman, and I've been a member of the National Union of Mine Workers for over 50 years, and I'm here in a personal capacity. I worked in the Lancashire coalfield and came to work here in the late 90s for the National Union here in Barnsley. I remember asking where the monument was to the Oaks disaster, and having looked at the impressive monument to the rescuers opposite Kendry Hospital and the monument down at Christchurch Ardsley that said to 354 miners, I wondered why England's largest mining disaster in terms of fatalities at 361 did not have a monument for all those who died in the Oaks disaster. I started in the coal industry in 1975 and had the privilege of working with and learning from miners, some of whom were in the 60s when I started, who wanted new recruits to know of the Pretoria pit disaster that killed 344 men and boys in Lancashire in 1910. I think they wanted to us to know about the inherent danger of mining and working in the pit. And we got to know about that disaster, and it was passed on basically in generation to generation. And there's some impressive monuments over there to that disaster, which I suppose in one day was the worst disaster in terms of numbers of fatalities for one day. So knowing that the 150 years anniversary of the Oaks disaster was coming up, I asked the Yorkshire NUM chairman, Mr Chris Skidmore, if there were any plans for this important anniversary. And he said he would organise a meeting with various retired miners groups to see what could be done. And we met with people in mining, with Barrymore, Frank, Peter and Bill, and they were ready to help and quickly got the support of our favourite sculptor, who's here tonight, a good job I mentioned him, Graham Ibbison. Barry and Graham both had relatives killed in the disaster. And with the help of individuals and retired miners groups, ways were sought to try and raise funds for a fitting monument. We quickly found out that there was no magic wands, even with Graham providing his skills without cost. The reality was this was not going to be easy. We knew the NUM was fighting to keep Colliery open at the time, and the council had to keep to strict budgets. So we thought we'd try the lottery. Not to buy a ticket, but to see if we could get out from them. But we quickly found out that they were not able to provide funds for monuments. So I remember Barry Moore saying to us all at meetings, saying that if we don't do this now, it'll never get done. So let's make it happen. And we carried on with bucket collections and donations. And we got a good start from a relative of Parkin, Jeffcott, who lives in America now, and he gave us quite a sizable donation to kick us off. And then Graham commenced work on the clay. I think it's clay. And he produced some maquettes of what the monument would look like, and we could then get them into some sort of plastic or whatever, that we could make into a small model of what it would look like, and we could sell them for quite a large amount of money to raise funds, which we did, and that was, absolutely brilliant to keep us going. But it's pointed out to us by someone that the application to the National Lottery for an education project may have a chance. And with the help of Sarah Hughes, who's in here as well, who helped us with the application, and that was put in, and that was successful. We advertised for the post to lead the project, and we had some good candidates. And Barrymore and I did the interviews, and there was one candidate that we both said was the best, and that was hands down, and that was Paul Darlow. And that's when I first met Paul. I must have been on plenty of rallies with Paul over the years. But
give him a fiver as well.
It's the first time I met him. And the project ran at the same time as the funds being raised for the monument, and there is no doubt that it helped raise the awareness of what we were trying to achieve. The project produced a book, a film, and even won an award in Hollywood. I think Professor Stephen Lindston, he produced a film, and he went to Hollywood to pick up one of the many awards that he got. So the main thing with me was Paul putting together educational materials for teachers, because as well as being a miner starting off, he then became a teacher. And he put put together materials that teachers could use with children in the different years. And we remember going to schools and speaking to the children about the history. And I remember the first time that we went was saying that kids didn't even know about school. They knew that the families had all been miners, most of them had been miners, but they didn't know what coal was, and they hadn't heard of the Oaks Colliery. And by the time we finished going all around the schools, we was getting some questions about it, saying, you'll know what year 6 or whatever the name was. I remember this young lad, he says, it's after such an important disaster as that. He said, why was there no primary legislation after it?
Year 6.
Somebody's reading it, which was great. And what we tried to do with it, is put it all in, add a context with it. You know, like we looked at the Oscar, absolutely horrendous, all that happened to those children, and that the Royal Commission, and there is two volumes of it, and that's it, they've got that in the NUM. And if you read that Royal Commission there with the children and the interviews that they did, now they had to live in them times, absolutely, it break your heart. And obviously there was the Oaks disaster of 1847, so all these disasters, Darlow, Maine with 75 dead, Lundhill with 189, and Edmonds, Maine with 59. So all this had happened in the run-up to the Oaks, so we didn't want any of them to be thought of like, only the Oaks matters. And we've said that, and the words are on the monument there. It's a focal point for all disasters that's happened. It happens to be the largest number of fatalities in an English coal mine. But the fact that that's there, that monument's there, it's not underplaying anybody else's, any other disaster. It's there for us all, and we made that quite clear, and everybody who was involved in it made that clear. I'll make a point regarding the number, because I know that there's been some controversy of it, but the HM coroner's inquest, that stated 361 deaths. The report by the Mines Inspector, Mr Dickinson, presented to both Houses of Parliament by command of Her Majesty, stated 361 deaths. The report by the Mines Inspector, J. Kenyon Blackwell, presented to both Houses of Parliament by command of Her Majesty, stated 361 deaths. This figure was accepted, and mining historians have looked at this over the past years. You know, and Machin, who wrote the history of the Yorkshire miners, he looked at it before I were born, and he said there's no other evidence other than 361. There's lots of historians looked at it since, so the figure was accepted. And one thing that we in conclusion, one thing that we learned looking back is that people in the past were not as stupid at all, and they were certainly able to count, and there was lots of science that was about at the time. And I think that was a big eye-opener when we were looking at how they was recording the figures for the Oaks, to see whether or not it was safe enough to go down with the barometrical readings, etc., and all other readings. So they weren't backward in any way. If they'd have had the modern technology that we've got today, they'd have probably been streets ahead. That's my view anyway. And finally, with due respect to Joseph Brammer, who died 52 years, because it's Joe Brammer Memorial Lecture, he died 52 years before the Oaks disaster of 1866. And with all his achievements and inventions and what he managed to achieve, nobody could say he couldn't, he didn't know how many beans made 5. So that concludes mine.
Thanks, Paul. Well, the first thing is that when I started doing the research into Oaks, I was amazed to find the human stories, the social stories, the political stories, and the economic stories. Why did anybody want to work at this pit that caused so much death and destruction? And they did, and it was because of money. If you look at the map there, it's a Google map, I did this other day. I wanted to give you some idea of where the Oaks was in the Red Star, and all the other places around. The miners came from Gorber, from Dodderth. There were 2 miners from Dodderth worked at the Oaks. Can you imagine getting up? I mean, Paul touched on it there, the historical empathy. Can you imagine getting up in the morning and walking to the Oaks from Dodderth? I mean, nobody would do it today to walk back, to catch a bus back. And there were people from Longwood, from Mount Bretton, but the vast majority of miners at the Oaks worked in the Cundy Cross, Oil Mill, Stairfoot and Ardsley. You can see them on that map. There were 2 miners from Gorber and one from Darton. You can imagine walking from Darton in the morning at 4 o'clock. So that's the reason that I put that map on. Where was the Oaks? It's got a big blue arrow there. It didn't have a big blue arrow on for the people walking in the morning at 4 o'clock. But the Oaks was, today it's an industrial estate. Later on in the slides, I'll show you something what happened on the 150th anniversary of the strike. Me and Paul went down with the fiberglass monument that Graham did, what we did for fundraising efforts for the memorial. I'll give the game away already. The history of the Oaks is a very, very long, complicated history. It appears that the first shafts at the Oaks Colliery were sunk in 1824. If you look at, they went down as far as the Melton Field, which I think it was about 102 metres deep, the Melton Field at the Oaks. It just says there, it was worked at the old Oaks Colliery, the first shafts were sunk to it in 1824. That's the only evidence that I can find of the starting of the Oaks. It's now being worked by Rylands Main, which is another story. For the people at Barnsley Main, they'll know better than me what the coal, all the coal pits in that area. There were Barnsley Main, there were the Oaks, and there was Rylands Main. That's an engraving I put on here originally, because this is an old school, what I used in schools, that it was around 1830 to 40 when they made this engraving. But I've since updated that, and I think it was late 1840s. And the reason for that is, when the Oaks was first sunk, they moved the coal away by barge from the canals that were nearby. And it's got a railway in. You can see with the 2 shafts, the infamous Oak shafts, number 1 and number 2. And they just get the coal up, pushed it out in tubs. And you can see the big long thing that looks like some kind of inflatable device that filled coal tubs up. And you can see the coal trucks all down, all waiting to be filled up with coal and moved on. They had a big steam stove coal market, because one of the things that the Oaks Colliery wanted was that they sank it down to the Melton Field. Then they thought, right, in 1838, we're going for a real prize, which was the Barnsley bed. The Barnsley bed coal was, some historians said, better than the South Wales coalfield coal, steam coal. Just the type of product that people needed for an emerging industry, for the railways, for the steamships. So the market was there, and they paid a fortune for it. Hence, it did a double blow for the Oaks, in that it was a place where people wanted to work, and it also, because of the money that they could earn, and also there was a market for it. The shafts in 1838 were deepened to the Barnsley bed steam, and that was, I'll get my statistics out, my bag of statistics, that were 246 metres down, which were unprecedented. John Benson, in his history of the 19th century coal miners, he said that it was the deepest shaft in Yorkshire at that time, in 1838. Mount Osborne Colliery, which was, you know, the Mount Pub, back of there, that was one of the shafts at Mount Osborne. The other one was down at the range, you know, the range. As you walk into the range, one of the shafts were outside where you walk into the range, so if it dips, don't go in. But you can see that there were a very, very, people needed this coal. The coal owners needed it because they could sell it and become very rich. The miners needed it because, well, the miners didn't need it, but they were a good source of money for them. That's a photograph that I found at Yorkshire Miner It's on the number 2 shaft at Barnsley Main, which is not to be seen. You can just see the start of the winding engine, and you can see a shaft at the side of it, obscured. And that's the cupola shaft, the shaft which the furnaces at the bottom, the 2 furnaces at the bottom of the Oaks, 70 metres away from the pit bottom, that sucked the air around the pits. That were 400 metres away from the main shafts, those 2 shafts we've just seen. And it sucked the air around the pit. That guy there with a brilliant beard, he's believed to be Dan Rylands of Rylands Glassworks, but he also had that pit on the left, which are Rylands Main, which is again in the Barnsley Main site. It's all on the site. And I just thought that were interesting. I mean, there's no evidence, there's no way of determining whether it is Rylands Main or whether it's even the Barnsley Main, but it does fit in. Number 2 shaft obscured with all that smoke. The cupola shaft nearest to us, and on the left, Rylands Main shaft, which is all filled in now. There's an old postcard, and it's number 2 shaft, which is still there. The one in the distant one, that's number 2 shaft at Barnsley Main. And this one nearest to us is the cupola, the Oaks cupola shaft. Like I said, at the bottom of that shaft are 2 massive furnaces that were lit all the time. 2 guys, one on 8-10 hour shifts, the other one on 12-hour shifts, the other one on the 12-hour nights. And they kept the fires going all the time. More of them later, because there's a story to be told about the engine man. There's an old map of the Barnsley Main site. You'll see that number 3 shaft, where it says number 3 shaft, that's the Rylands Main. Number 2 shaft, which is still there, the winder's still there. You can see that this says cupola filled. So I think it was filled in about 1908, probably, it might have been later. Very interesting area, the Barnsley Main Group, and I'm sure the Barnsley Main Group that's here today, I'll say far more about it than I can. I can remember it when I was doing my training at Barnsley Main. A photograph of the Oaks Colliery, believed to be around 1900, 1910. They've got your coal wagons at the front. I think that's very, how can I say, you can imagine going to that pit and going down it. You've got number 4 shaft of Barnsley Main, obscured in steam, and then they've got the Oak shafts on the very left of the picture. Look at that and think you've got to go up them stairs to go into the pit bank. Then you get on the cage and went down the pit. For 361 people, that's the last thing they probably saw of daylight. There's a close-up of the number of the 2 shafts of the Oaks shaft from that postcard. You see the winding house. I think at the back of that big building at the back, I think there were a water shaft, because they eat a lot of water when they're at the mountain field. And they had to have a pump put in. In fact, one of the problems that they got at Barnsley Main was water, because it went through a strata that were full of water. But not being put off, the owners saw the money in their eyes. And that's not Barnsley Main, by the way. I think that's Elsica. I might be wrong, but I think it's Elsica. That's just to give, well, like I say, it's for school kids, what I did this for originally. It's an old underground roadway supported by wooden props which main materials and air travelled along. That's similar to the main planes, the main engine roadways at the Oaks. Can't say that it's identically like that because nobody took a photograph, surprisingly. And there's colliers filling the coal from the coal seam. The coal seam at the Oaks was called the Barnsley Bed, which was just explained, and it were around 6 foot to 9 foot thick, were actually 11 foot thick in places. It went on a gradient. The workings at the Oaks were such that they've been going since 1838. By 1866 they've got a lot of coal out already, and a lot of it went to the steam industry, like I explained. A lot of it caused all these acreage, and I think there's 460 acres of underground roadways in the Barnsley bed stream. So it was a fairly substantial concern. The further you went, because it's an extractive industry coal mining, the more coal that you got out, the further away from the shafts you went. And that's what happened at the Oaks. And that's the problem. There's the underground workings of the Oaks. There's a better picture there. I've distributed those maps that I've given you. They're not very good. It's my fault that, because one, I didn't know how to operate a photocopying machine. And two is, I'll try to get them a bit larger, but as I've made it larger, it pixelated, so... But that's from the report given, like Paul said, by Blackwell. Blackwell report.
Blackwell, the second one, yeah.
If you look at the two shafts at the top, the main roadway comes down eastward. So where you see that north-south sign, that's roughly about the area. Me and Paul once worked it out that the Thompson's Boxhole, which is 800 yards from the pit bottom, lies somewhere beneath. If you go today, it's hard to distinguish where I think there are glassworks and there are a canal. Where the canal bends to go towards Stairfoot, the Thompson's Boxhole were more or less on that bend. So you can see it's a fairly, I mean, I won't like to think I were walking back up that engine plane to the shaft bottom, then we had to walk back to Dodworth or Darton somewhere. Again, historical empathy plays its part. You see all those places, the new level, the south level, all places where men got killed and some survived. That's the copy of the map that I've got here. The blue arrow is actually where this guy from the Barnsley gas company called Mr. Humphreys, he went down the pit in 1863 to pipe gas from that where it says Z and there's that blue arrow. He piped gas to the pit bottom, gas that were in a gassy pit from a gassy scene. You know what they did with it? They didn't just let it blow away into the air. They actually lit gas lanterns down the main engine plane. So down the engine plane you've got naked flames. A lot of people said it's silly, it's insane, but for the pit bottom, there wouldn't be much gas around pit bottom until it exploded. Then I suppose it was a bit of concern. But that's from the abandonment plan of the Oaks. It's hard to see this sort of magnification. You can just see on there where the canal is. We hooked one of them things into it, laser thing. But you can see the canal where it's all coloured in red. That's where they've got the coal. You can see the two shafts, number one pit, number two pit. And then you can see the shafts, you see the canal bending round and then down and it's going off towards the bottom. That's from the abandonment plan, like I said, so. The Oaks miners had a very, very, very strong union. They went on strike pretty regularly. When the Miners Association was set up in 1858, the first pit to go on strike were the Oaks, because they tried to reduce the wages, and they won. They didn't lose. Everybody thinks that miners joined unions and they lost. Well, they didn't. They won. And then in April 1866, they passed that rule of the South Yorkshire Miners Association. It says that the death of any financial member of this association caused by accident while following his employment, there shall be paid to his widow the sum of 5 shillings and 1 shilling per child under 12 years of age for the period of 12 months. That nearly crippled the union about 6-7 months later, because they didn't know that the Oaks were going to come along. About 1:15 on Wednesday, the 12th of December, an explosion ripped through the underground workings of the Oaks. It's actually in a newspaper article about the black snow going up, and there were farm labourers in Cudworth, and it started raining soot from the Oaks. Whether that's true, I do not know, but it says in contemporary newspapers, which have got a tendency to be a bit poetic, with the truth. Let's put it like that. What we can say definitely about that is that a lot of people just had a lot of near misses. I've got a list here, which the one guy went to the shaft side on an afternoon shift, which is very rare because the vast majority of the miners on the Oaks were on day shift. They were on the shift that produced coal. And he didn't count, he normally had a count to his mate on pit top, and he went straight down pit. As he was walking away from pit bottom, he got blown up in an explosion. Two men called Ibbotson and his mate, it's in here somewhere, but it's called his mate. They overlaid on the day of the explosion, and they missed it for overlaying. Another guy called William Ward was the president of the Oaks branch, the Union branch. And he was told on the Tuesday by John Normansell, the president of the Yorkshire Miners Association, if he'd do him a favour. And so Matt Williams says, yeah, I'll do you a favour. I want you to go to Chesterfield with this money for the locked out miners of Chesterfield, because it says South Yorkshire Miners Association, but in fact there were the South Yorkshire and Derbyshire Miners Association. So he took some money for the locked out miners of Chesterfield, came back. He normally worked with his dad down pit. Came back, got off at train at 5 o'clock, and he started at 1:15. And he says, what's happening? Because there were no mobile phones then, no radios, no ways of communicating. And somebody says, oh, the Oaks pit's blown up. So he ran to the pit, went down pit to the rescue party, come out at pit later that night, but went back to volunteer for the next rescue party at 9 o'clock the next morning. There was a second explosion, but more of that later. So how lucky were he? After the first explosion, there were 18 miners found alive in the pit bottom area. There's a list of the 18 miners that were found alive. Some of them are not real. The problem with the Oaks, especially with the names, is that the press had a field day. They were just making names up and putting it in the... William Ewell were one, William Narvin were one, they were, we can say with hand on heart that those were the people that probably got out. So let's put it like that. But if you, some newspapers have got different names, different spellings of names, then people are going, we ain't mentioned my sister, my brother. And so, you just to take away a pinch of salt on names. However, out of those initial brought out of the pit, only 6 survived. And those are the other 6. William Henry Marshall, Robert Thompson, Smith Bates, fantastic name, William Ewell and George Tasker. And I'm going to get you something about these because some of the stories that these tell. Smith Bates, he lived at Woosby Common, and he'd worked at... He worked at the Oaks for 2 years. He worked with his dad, and he was severely... When they found him, he got on second row at the pit. That's the second time the lift went up. And he went with Henry Marshall, so them was one of the first people to be rescued out of the Oaks. He was that severely burnt, even at the inquest 2 months later, he was still bandaged up. So can you just imagine that? He'd just been that pit, bandaged up, blown to smithereens, badly burnt, and you had to go home. Because when he went out at pit, they said, oh, you're okay. So they sent him to the pub, gave him a shot of whiskey, then sent him home up on an horse and cart. At the inquest, he complained about the lack of air in his workplace. And they asked him then what number bank, which is a way of mining, they work in. He said, I'm no scholar and I don't know the number. So it gives you some idea of his educational capabilities. That's why you should always go to school, folks, working. In 1868, that's 2 years after the people are up, he was still employed at the Oaks. In fact, he helped bring a guy took a lantern down the pit, which was against rules, because he got a naked flame, and if gas got into the lantern, it would blow up. And he was one of the people that prosecuted the guy, and he got an old guy, I forgot his name now. If you look in newspapers, you can find information about that. He got 2 years hard labour for risking. I suppose the nature of the explosion still hung over the Oaks. So that's Smith Bates. I've lost others. William Henry Hart, that's him. He lived at Scar House, Ardsley. He was 11-year-old at the time of the explosion. And he had a pit pony called Tom. And Tom, as he was going along the roadway, collapsed. And he fell underneath Tom. And the explosion ripped through the workings, and it saved William Henry's life. He got 12 shillings per week from the Oaks Relief Committee. And by 1908, he was the only living survivor from the first explosion. He died in January 1914. William Ewell, he lived at Ardsley. He was a lampman at Oaks. And if you look at the map, you'll see at the side of the shafts, they've got drift written on it. You can't see, can you? That one. It's got a new stone drift. Can you see that? Where the blue arrow is. Just come down a little bit, past number 2 shaft, and you see a new stone drift. They were sinking this new stone drift. Some people at the inquest said it was the reason for the disaster, because they were going to fire it. They were going to board and all in it. They fired it, and the guys that were sinking that, they were contracting, and they said, "Will you go down, William, and strike one of their things so they can put gunpowder in?" He says, "I'll do it, and we'll see if I've had it, because it's nearly through into that was aid ventilation, believe it or not." William did that, came back in the lamp room, told all the people around the back, the pit bottom area, said, get it box on, because we're going to fire the shot. And as the shot fired, it blew everybody up, because that was explosion. Another reason to think that what caused the explosion, but it didn't. Well, nobody knows what caused the explosion, but I don't think that was one of the reasons. And he'd worked at the Oaks for 13 years. They were in the box when the explosion happened. There's a lot of them more that survived. They're in the pit bottom area. And the explosion knocked him to the ground where he remembers flames and fire. Robert Thompson. He lived at Littleworth, Littleworth Lane, Mount Bretton. And he worked at the Oaks for 13 years, and he worked in the south level. Was in the box when the explosion happened, taking his lamp back to Ewell. And he said that when he can just remember flames and fire all gathering around him as they were involved in the explosion. I think he died in about 1908, something like that. And perhaps the most tragic person of this whole enterprise is the guy Henry Marshall. He lived at Copper Street, Barnsley. I think that's at Woolsby Common. I might be wrong. He was aged 11-year-old. And he worked with William Ewell as a lamp carrier. The old lamps that they used in the Oaks were Stevenson lamps. And one of the reasons that you could tell they were gas present was that the lamp started going very dim. Unlike the safety lamp, the Davis safety lamp, where it flared up. The Stevenson lamps got dimmer and dimmer. And so Henry Marshall had to go to all these different people with lamps because they were getting dimmer and dimmer. If ever you got a Stevenson lamp, it starts going dim, run. And he left the pit, he survived, he took lamps to the 7th hole because all his lamps were going dark, and he was suddenly felled by the fire. When I came round, he was at home, so it knocked him unconscious basically. And on Saturday the 3rd of December 1870, he'd actually gone back in the pits, but he didn't go back to the Oaks, he went to Agnes Main and he was killed in a roof fall. Age 17. George Tasker. George was an engine man, furnace man, and he tells a really good story about how he survived. He was telling to everybody, like people do that bit. And as he walked towards the furnace tent, to his furnace to make sure the fires were still lit, he heard a cat, and he picked this cat up, and this cat, they were on a little kitten. And then the explosion happened, and he was talking to his mate who was called, I think he was called Bentley or something like that. And it blew up, and this cat got killed. And when I said this to kids, they all went, oh, now this is disastrous, cats got killed. I said, what about 361 people there? Don't forget about that. But this cat got killed, and he was still had it in his arms, and he come round when he got to picked up. He still got this little baby kitten in his arm. And he said they were knocked unconscious, basically. So them just 6 survivors from the first explosion. This is from the South Yorkshire Mines Association. It's fortnightly delegate meeting. The Oaks Colliery had 2 new members, boasting its branch to 275. So on the 10th of December, 1866, 275 members of the Oaks branch paid the dues to the union. A month later, on the 7th of January, you can just see that line, the Ardsley already had 16 members. Tells the story, doesn't it? Where they gone? And there's a picture of the second guy from the left. I think that's William Ward. That photograph I took at Manvers Main, so he must have left Oaks and gone to Manvers. The guy with the beard. And it looks as if he's had an education because he's got a deputy stick. Or not an education, depending on where you're doing it. The Oaks company employed a company called Woodhouse and Jeffcott. They were mining engineers. And Mr. Woodhouse was in London at the time of the explosion. These were responsible for all the ventilation, for all the coal getting out, they won the coal, etc. And this Parkin Jeffcott were in his office in Derby when the telegram come saying the Oak pit's got on fire. So immediately got the train, got off at Cudworth at 10 o'clock at night, and went to the Oaks and went down pit straight away to see what he could do about getting air, because one thing is when you go down the pit you need air to get air going around where it should go. And so that's what he was doing. He went down at 10 o'clock at night, never come back out because he got involved in the second explosion. He was down on the engine plane right at end near Thompson's box. He was down that area trying to put some practicing up. Him not personally, he'd have been directing some volunteers to do that. But on 9 o'clock on Thursday the 13th of December, the Oaks Colliery exploded again. Then at 7:40 in the evening, another explosion. So this is Thursday. This is a day after the first explosion. All the volunteers that rushed to help the people, the miners at the Oaks, they were involved in these explosions. And there's a picture there that's from Euston, what is it called that?
From Times, I think.
Is it from Times? It's London Illustrated News as well, wasn't it? And that's all the people, that's giving you some idea. There were no photographs of the Oaks, or being on fire and everything, but it just gives you some idea of what sort of, again, historical empathy. What would you have done if your husband were down there, or brother, your dad, you'd have been running to the shaft to find out what were up. As they fetched the bodies out of the pit, they laid them out in what we call it, what carpenter's shop on the pit top.
There's a woman and child.
And there was a woman and child there as well.
That's great.
I must tell them this story, Graham, that when we went collecting at Morrison's, and this black woman says, "Oh, it's a lovely statue, this, we're in a fiberglass statue." And I says, "Oh, Graham got his idea from, if you look at the lady down here with the little child holding the leg." I said, "Graham got his idea from that." Graham looked at me and says, "I didn't." And that's the woman and child there, that's it. So don't jump to conclusions when Graham's about. And I honestly thought that that's where he got his inspiration from, but obviously not. Again, it's a good image of what sort of things people were seeing and what they were experiencing in this tragedy. After the second explosion, I think it was number 1 shaft, it blew the pit lift, the cage, up into the headgear. And that's a picture from the London Illustrated News of it blown up into the headgear. All these engineers and all that stood round. And then it went pretty quiet then, because people went home. They said, right, there's nobody survived the 3 explosions. So they all started drifting off home. The engineers went to the White Hart Hotel in Barnsley and got put up there till the next morning while they decided what they were going to do. And they left skeleton staff on the pit top to make sure that nobody went and looked of it, shied and fell down, I suppose. And then perhaps one of the most remarkable rescues of this whole affair happened. At 3 o'clock in the morning, somebody heard something and they thought he had been drinking. They said, "Oh, they had a pint or two, they ought to get this enough room, they give it rest on them." Now I've heard somebody say, don't forget the big shaft here. And they heard somebody rap from the pit bottom. Ding, ding, ding. So they thought, well, there must be somebody down there. But the pit had been, the shaft, the cage had been blown up into the workings, so there's no way going down the pit. I always say this to kids, there's a shaft. Don't forget, it's 2 explosions down there. Who would volunteer to go down there to search for a volunteer? At this point, it depends on year 6, so put their hand up, I'll do it, yeah, no problem. Now, whether they do it or not, I don't think they would, but they actually got a sawmill engine, got a temporary headgear, and then lowered down in that kibble used by Mr. Mamet and Mr. Embleton. Mr. Mamet was the colliery surveyor and Mr. Embleton were a mining engineer. And they was the only people, I suppose, that were around at the pit top at that time.
Volunteered, didn't
They volunteered to go down. There's a picture of him. Mr. Mamet with the bowler hat on. Mr. Embleton, I think that's old guy who was also there. His dad was there. And his dad actually sat next to the guy that was operating the winding engine from the sawmill, who panicked and he says, "I can't do this, I can't do it." And he says, "That's all right, lad, I'll be it. I'll vouch for this if that was wrong." I mean, it's just unbelievable, isn't it, when you think about it? But he went down and he halfway down there to put the lights under the jackets because the water gushing down the shaft. So when it had exploded the second or first time, it blew all the water pipes out. So this is on a December morning, it's not middle of July. So on a December morning they went down shaft. They must have been freezing cold, and then they got this sweater on top of them. And it was blowing the lamps out. When they got to the pit bottom, there was a guy there called Samuel Brown. Sorry, they lowered, before all this happened, they lowered a bottle of brandy and somebody took it, so they whipped it back and said, "There's somebody down there, they've nicked me brandy." So they went down the pit, as I said, following that procedure I've just gone through. They went down and Samuel Brown was set there. And the first thing they said to him was, Are you the only one? Is Mr Jeff got there? So again, class politics comes into it. They won't bother to Samuel Brown. Well, but they were bothered over him. It'd be wrong to say they won't. But the reason they went down was to look for parking Jeff got. The engineer. So Samuel Brown, it doesn't end there. The drama doesn't end there because they got Samuel Brown into this kibble, and it was very unstable. And as they put Samuel Brown in, it slipped. Mr Mamet managed to just grab hold of it, otherwise he were dead. He were in sump. I mean, it's like an horror film from Hollywood, isn't it? And it's true. This is the true story of what happened in Barnsley 160 years ago this year. The recovery of the bodies. 75 bodies were got out before the shafts were filled in. So what happened after they got Samuel Brown out? They filled the shafts in. They filled them in because they needed to cut the flow of oxygen off to the workings. We were on fire, people were on fire. When Mr Mamet come up, he says, I looked down the main roadway and I could see fire everywhere. There were pit tubs on fire, there were props on fire, everything were on fire. So he thought, if the coal's on fire, then we're doomed. There's only one way out of it. So they took a scaffold down at, I think it was just above the Melton Field seam, put a pipe in, and like Paul says, they measured the gas that were coming out. They filled it in with clay, so it was a seal. They measured the gas to see if it was still on fire. Then they filled the other two shafts in, the cupola shaft and the number one shaft. So they knew what they were doing. They weren't thick. They knew exactly what they were doing. So 75 bodies were got out before the shafts were filled in. When reopened in 1867, they reopened it in September 1967. Nearly about 10 months later, 7 got recovered. The first body to be recovered was from Musbury Dale. I think his name was Jones. I might be wrong with that. And they recognised him for his boots at the end, because he bodied his brother-in-law's boots. And he worked at Edmonds Main. He left a wife who were blind and 3 kids. In 1868, 60 people got killed. In 1869, 48. In 1870, there were 12 people got out, and I think it's diminished. I don't know when the last of them were recovered, but there's still a lot of people down there, let's put it like that. Out of the widow and orphans, there were 150 widows, 300 children, and the union's response, it honoured everything that it said it were going to do, even though they were crippled them. What I didn't mention when I looked at that slide on the April 1866, when they passed that law giving widows if the husband got killed at pit, the following month they gave £100 to the Sheffield filesmiths for their they were in dispute about being recognised as a trade, a bit like linen weavers, etc. Well, the jobs were beginning to be took away from them. And they gave £100, and in response, after the explosion, the Sheffield Filesmiths gave £300 back to the union to help them pay these death dues. £49,000, which had a fortune in 1866, were paid out in death duties. And we've touched on the list. There's many lists. They're selling them at a penny a piece to raise money for the funds. This is at 600. It's interesting to know that about 2 or 3 months after the explosions, a young girl, we thought this, didn't we, Paul? We thought this young girl, she came to look at the Oaks pit. She was from Hull, and she got relatives in Barnsley. She got a red dress on, and she went through Engine House, and it got caught at Engine House, and it pulled her in, and she got massive, you can imagine what she got splattered. And I always thought that she was the 361st, but she wasn't, because she didn't work that big for a start. So, there's the Oaks Bible given by the fund, the official fund. There were 2 funds, there were Yorkshire NUM, the Yorkshire, South Yorkshire Miners Association Fund, which you've got to be a member, although they did help non-members as well, such as being a union. Then the other fund was the, I forgot its name, Paul. It was the Oaks Colliery Disaster Fund, let's call it that. And they gave the gift of the Oaks Explosion Subscription Relief Fund Committee. They gave it to all the kids that were, and one of the Bibles has this guy in called Tom Farmery. Oh, I don't think we found him on the list, did we? The list is very, very hit and miss. But if you look at his family history, he got people killed at the Lundhill explosion, 26 years. The Edmonds Main, I think, is on there as well. So his family, if I were his son, I'd be saying, I'm not going down, Pete. And some Oak souvenirs believed to have been sold at the time of the disaster raise fund for the victims. I had a brief discussion with this gentleman in here this afternoon. You can still get these, but they're very, 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 very sought after and very expensive. Frank Bergen's got best collection. You're going to live in me, aren't they, Frank? Teapots, sugar bowls, cups. There's one thing missing, and that's memorial. Like Paul said, he went looking for the memorial. The one on the right is the one in Ardsley churchyard. The one on the left is at Upper Kendrill. The one on the left was made by Mr. Micklethwaite, who was the landowner of Ardsley Hall, and he made that to all the volunteers. I think that he looked at what happened at Cadeby when Cadeby blew up, and a lot of rescuers got killed there, similar to the Oaks, and they put a memorial up for all the rescuers, and I think that's a reflection of what he thought, well, if they can do it, we can. So that one on the left, it doesn't mention all the 361, just the memorial to the volunteers. Then the other one in the Ardsley churchyard, that one, Mr. Micklethwaite, who lived at Ardsley Hall, and it says on it that 354 miners lost at the Oaks pit. So you can see that they're all over the place. There were no memorial to the miners that were killed in the Oaks Colliery until now. This memorial was designed by Barnsley sculptor Graham Ibbotson. There's Graham with the memorial. A fantastic work of art and a fantastic thing. And I think we've done justice for memorial for lads that got killed in pit. Hold on a minute. And a new memorial to all the victims. The next slide is what I was telling you at the beginning. A copy of the memorial on top of the Oak shaft, exactly 150 years. Graham did a fiberglass statue, and we went to put it, and that's where the shafts were today. It's a turnaround in an industrial park. Lorries go into the factory and come out of the factory. That were 150 years exactly, that were at 1:15 on a Sunday afternoon when it was. We took it in car, we put it on top of the shaft. And that's where it is. I mean, the shaft's gone, you wouldn't know there's a shaft there, but that's exactly the spot. And I find that probably out of all the slides that we've done the most poignant, because it's a reflection of today, remembering the past. And paying respect to the NUM officers on the day of the 12th of December. The lady there on the right, she was just walking past. And she says, "What are you doing?" And she says, we're remembering the people that got killed. Oh, my great-granddad were involved in that. And so we got her up and took a picture. There's Barry Moore there next to the statue. Graham, Chris Kitchen, the NUM President, General National Secretary, and this lady that were walking past. I don't know her name, so I can't trace her family tree. And there's some photos of the pit site taken in the 1970s and 1981. I think they were redeveloping the site to become Barnsley Main as it is today. That's the number 4 shaft. And on the right is the Oaks, that's the bank where the Oaks was. Thanks to Mr. Thompson, I think is here today. He lent me them photographs and I quickly copied them and put them on there. And last, Barnsley Main Colliery opened in 1899. It shut in 1966, reopened in 1985 and shut in 1991. If you look at that office block, that's where the Oaks was, more or less, where that office block, just in front of that number 4 shaft. Brand new spanking shaft. Remember them sinking it. And that's Barnsley Main, number 2 shaft, and wider today. And that is it. I've no more slides to show, Linda.